One of the biggest myths of feminism that I've noticed that people have had is that they assume that women did not make money before feminism. That women weren't capable of making money, that they weren't allowed to make money, that they weren't allowed to have their own money. Women have had jobs. Women have worked for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. It has not, however, looked like what it looks like now. So right now, in the current worldscape, women working looks like what men working used to look like, right? Like the man goes off to do his job. Since the Industrial Revolution, he's over there doing his thing, coming home, bringing home a paycheck, giving it to his wife so that she can go out and buy their groceries, that she can go out and buy their clothes or the cloth to make them, or that she can go out and barter stuff for them. That's what generally was happening. However, nowadays, that's what both women and men do. They go out to work, they do the things. Now, that does not mean that women did not have jobs for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Even in ancient times, women bartered and sold things. So like they would make a good or have a product and they would barter that for someone else's. So if they didn't have honey, they would go over to the lady or the family who had honeybees and who had honey. And they would be like, okay, I have this purple cloth. Will you give it to me for such and such? It was called bartering. Right? So the women would do that. They would go to the marketplace, they would set up their little shop, and they would barter and sell. Now the men did that too, but the women still had these businesses that they were running. They had things that they made that they sold. They didn't have bank accounts for every single person back then. They didn't have bank accounts, not at least in the way that we do now. But women weren't sitting there having their own bank account, but women did go out, make money, bring them home, use it for groceries, use it for things their family needed. And the same with men. They went out, they made money in some sort of way, or they bartered or traded, whatever they did, and they came home and they brought it for whatever everyone to use. However, women were not just going out there without their children for hours upon hours upon hours upon hours on end. You know, like if you went to the marketplace and you had a baby, you were the only person who could feed that baby. Now, granted, other people in the village generally did help with that, but in most cases, mothers weren't like just separated from their baby for hours upon hours on end. You know, it might be maybe the grandparents are watching the baby, or someone else in the village is watching the baby for a short period of time, and if the baby needs fed during that time, they were feeding them. But for the most part, mom was feeding the baby. For the most part, the mom was taking the baby places that wherever she was going. So if she was going to barter and sell, she just strapped it to her back and went over, bartered and sold. You know, like these jobs that women had back then, even in more recent times, seamstresses, teachers, nurses, like a lot of people were that before they got married. And then once they did have kids, they were more central to the home. But I mean, even in like the smaller towns, I'm sure that there were teachers who were married and were like, okay, you're going to come to my house and I'm going to teach you. And they would teach the kids, but like they weren't like leaving their own children, their very, very young children, over somewhere else just to go do that. And so that's the difference I think that feminism has made in this progression, is women have always worked and had like ways that they made money or ways that they did things. It's just that the home was their central location. Like that was the place they operated out of. Same with the men. But the men just had more like longer periods that they were away from home. So if they were in a hunter-gatherer situation, they were the hunters. They were going out and sometimes would be there for a week or two. You know, they were the more primary provider in that aspect because they did have that freedom. Like they weren't literally feeding a child, so they weren't necessarily bound to that child. And I think a lot of people view that as negative, right? The fact that women were bound to their children, or that they always brought their children everywhere if they were working or making money. But I think nowadays there's a lot of women who are coming out and realizing, I don't want to be separated from my little baby infant, right? Like that doesn't make sense. Like they're not independent enough for that yet. However, because of feminism, we've created more jobs, that now there is a demand for more jobs, that, like, for instance, if the entire workforce of females just quit tomorrow, there would be mass chaos, because we've created these jobs for women, especially since World War II. But since the feministic movement in general, now that these jobs are created, it's very hard for us to scale back. The demand for those jobs is there. They need people working in those jobs. They need women working in those jobs. The government needs taxation from women working as well. All of these items are dependent on one another, which is why you can't just undo what's been doing for generations. But this is definitely not the first time that women have worked. Like, women have been nurses, they've been teachers, they've been seamstresses. There may have been more work that they're able to do nowadays because of the way the modern world functions. But that's not always positive, because I do know that there are a lot of moms out there who are like, you know what, I would prefer to, have something where it's a little bit more family friendly, but their job isn't very family friendly. Like, it doesn't allow them to be home with their children and working, or another aspect. So, women have been working. It's for centuries upon centuries upon centuries. Even stay-at-home moms, like, they still work. They just do a different type of work than maybe you do. And I will say that the thing that I find ironic is a lot of the people who are like, oh my word, stay-at-home moms are so lazy, they don't work, they don't do anything, are usually the same people who will then be like, oh my goodness, I could never stay home with my child. I would not know what to do with them. Like, I just wouldn't be the best guide for them, whatever. So I just find that ironic. At the end of the day, let's try to have some nuance in our situations, right? There are women who have to work. They don't want to work, but they have to work because of the way their finances got set up and the way their situation is. So it's good to have a knowledge of that and acknowledge that women have always been working. There's a lot of good things, like women being able to vote. Like, that is a beneficial thing. That is beneficial. Women being allowed to have bank accounts, yes, it's beneficial. But the feminism of today, the third wave, that's not what it's about. It's not about equality anymore. That's may have been part of what it was about in the beginning. There were certainly radicalists that didn't want women in the home. Margaret Sanger equated the home life with slavery. And so there definitely were those radicalists, but yes, like, they were fighting for basic rights, voting, bank accounts. Yes, right? There are definitely some beneficial things that women received in order to have the same standing as men. But there are also a lot of ways in which it was almost an overdrive. So now there's a requirement for women, like a lot of in the economy, because of the way it's set up, you almost have to have two incomes. And that's because feminism has supply and demand. Feminism has created the demand for more and more jobs because they've wanted more and more women to be in the workforce. And so now women feel trapped in the workforce because it's hard to pull out of the workforce. Expenses are going to go up because of that. If you're having someone work in the workforce, they're going to have less time to be able to make homemade meals. So expenses, the demand for food that is pre-made, the demand for restaurants, fast food is going to go up, which means that prices are going to rise from that. It's just supply and demand. But that has been a result of, especially I would think, the second and third waves of feminism. Most especially the third wave is not as much about women just getting to be equal and women getting to vote. It's more just about their perceived rights, going beyond just, okay, women are equal to men, going into, okay, women shouldn't now be staying at home. We should create a world in which women have to go to work. We should create, all women should be doing XYZ. All women should have the opportunity to terminate a life within pregnancy, within their body. And so it's definitely taken a turn to continue something that we already had. Like, there was that equality, there was that equal opportunity, and it's just continued into something that hasn't proven to be beneficial, especially for mothers.